This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Interos and Carasoft. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the Navy and Marine Corps take their budget request to Capitol Hill. The Pentagon gets serious about the defense industrial base's supply chain and executing the vision for America's warfighting Navy. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Navy and Marine Corps are taking their budget requests and the reasoning behind them to Capitol Hill. The Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Eric Smith, testified about the budget request before the House Appropriations Committee this week. All three will go before the Senate Appropriations Committee on Tuesday. At the Navy League's Sea Air Space Conference this week, Undersecretary of the Navy Eric Raven tells me about the main things the Navy and Marine Corps will emphasize in the budget request.
First of all, readiness. The Department of the Navy Marine Corps team provides ready forces all around the world, ready to deter and, if necessary, fight anywhere in the world on a moment's notice. Next, after that, is people. We have to look after our people if we're going to succeed in any of our missions. That's not just about readiness and training. That's about looking after the whole individual. That's looking after families. So we have some really important quality of life initiatives built into the 2025 budget. That includes everything from looking after barracks to increasing support to military families, helping with childcare, and so much else. When warfighters go overseas, they depend on their families being taken care of. And our 2025 budget really advances the ball on that front. And finally, I would say our relationship with industry is incredibly important. This budget has significant investments into the submarine industrial base, and those really help support one of our key warfighting advantages, and that is the undersea. Between the U.S. need for submarines and our working with our two closest allies, the United Kingdom and Australia, to implement AUKUS, the undersea is incredibly important. Frankly, we're not where we need to be on some of those initiatives, but we have more than $15 billion of spending planned to work with industry to produce the undersea capabilities that we need.
One of the things that came up on the Chiefs panel this morning with the CNO and with the ACMAC was the integration of the Marine Corps and the Navy. Why is that important to drive tighter integration between those two services in your view, and what do you see in the budget that will drive that?
So every day I go to work and work with the Secretary of the Navy, the CNO, and the Commandant to deliver capabilities that make a difference in the joint force. And what I can say with great amount of pride is that the Navy and Marine Corps have never been more aligned on their mission. Just look at the investments in the 2025 budget. We've committed to 31 amphibious ships. We're moving forward with the light amphibious warship, which is a key capability for the Marine Corps in the Indo-Pacific. And we're also integrating on a lot of other capabilities. Think about unmanned and replicator, where the Navy and Marine Corps are really leading the Department of Defense's embrace of this new initiative to field new technologies on an operationally relevant time frame.
Technology obviously drives a lot of what we're seeing in this room and a lot of what the sailors and Marines use in the field. How have you seen that evolve over time, and what do you see in the budget that supports where the Navy wants to go technologically?
So agility and technology go hand in hand. And so from the Department of the Navy, we are looking at opportunities like Replicator, where the Navy and Marine Corps can tee up some of the most interesting, most promising technologies, not just to investigate and advance them, but to field them at operationally relevant timeframes. So looking to these new technologies and how to get them in the hands of the warfighters faster is one area where the services and the department are very much collaborating and moving things forward. Very excited about the creation of the Disruptive Capabilities Office in the Navy. The DCO is really meant to take learning from a lot of promising initiatives that we've had. Look at Task Force 59 in the Central Command area of operations, where we've been able to work with industry, field technologies, experiment, and learn from them very quickly. The Disruptive Capabilities Office is taking learning like that and being able to solve for all sides of the Rubik's Cube. How do we make use of new technologies in an operational setting? How do we contract for them? How do we budget for them? And how do we sustain them? and the DCO will be solving for all sides of that Rubik's Cube puzzle to make sure we're making the best out of new technologies.
The budget includes a lot of detail on platforms and where you would like to invest in platforms. A lot of discussion at this show about shipbuilding and delays and all of that. What do you take away from that discussion, and what do you see as the way that you and your colleagues as leaders in the Navy can try to change the trajectory that some of these programs are on, sir?
So the Secretary of the Navy in January directed a 45-day review of our shipbuilding portfolio. We've just briefed that out to Congress. We've had media engagements, and we're welcome to discussions from all takers on the lessons from that important review. That review was really focused on where are we today, and what it found was that we are behind on several critical programs. This is a status report of where we are, and we are building the case of where we need to go. Some of the lessons that came out of that review are not surprising. One lesson was that first-of-class ships can be very challenging to build on the schedule that we want them to be built. Anybody who's been watching Navy shipbuilding for years understands that's been a challenge that is not new. Where we need to go with that review is being able to take those lessons where we have not performed well and turn them into an action plan to make sure that we are retaining the lessons that everybody knew, uncovering the new lessons to get ahead of the next generation of challenges, and start implementing those reforms in a very accountable way. And so the 45-day review was the first step in this process, and we're going to be following up and pulling every lever to make sure we can perform better on our key shipbuilding programs.
How would you and Secretary Del Toro, Secretary Girton judge the way that you're moving forward on that a year from now, 2 years from now, and so on, to see that whatever action you're taking today as a result of that 45-year plan drives you in the direction that you want to go?
So that's a unique thing about the shipbuilding portfolio, is you don't see results right away. It takes almost 9 years to build a Virginia-class submarine. It takes several years to build a destroyer. It takes a little bit more than a decade to build an aircraft carrier. And so the time scales that we're dealing with means that we will not necessarily know within the next weeks or months if we're pulling the right levers. But what we can do is hold ourselves accountable. And that means being able to understand the plan moving forward and have a robust system in place to make sure that we are not just learning, but we are implementing the learning that we have today, and that will set us up for success over the long term.
Regarding learning, what do you learn when you come to an event like this, see the vendors? I know they have things that they want to say, they want to show you and all of that. How do you budget your time, I suppose, to make sure that you can take something back to the Pentagon that will be useful to share with you and your colleagues?
These events are always very exciting because it's a great platform to share the vision of where the Department of the Navy is going and how our warfighters fit in with the joint force and how they're making a difference all across the world. And so it's great to be able to deliver those messages to such a diverse audience. But in terms of listening, it's also really exciting to meet with the exhibitors here. They show exciting technologies, the breakthroughs that are on the precipice of making their way out into the fleet and making a difference in the real world. But also I very much value the ability to have a candid dialogue on what are the challenges as these exhibitors work with the Department of the Navy. And I hear feedback that, contracting could do better. Why can't we have more in the budget for X, Y, and Z? Those are all great conversations, but really it's about forming relationships and forming bonds of trust and a mutual targeting of the best opportunities we have to deliver new capabilities for the Department of the Navy moving forward.
Undersecretary of the Navy Eric Raven at Sea Air Space this week. You can read more about the budget request for fiscal 25 and find a link to the Navy and Marine Corps' budget hearings on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the Pentagon gets serious about the defense industrial base's supply chain. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's John Salen, Vice President of Cyber Solutions at GDIT, from the program Zero Trust In Depth, presented by GDIT.
I firmly believe that cybersecurity, particularly zero trust, but in general, it's not about compliance. It's not even really about IT. It's about meeting the mission objectives.
That's right.
And your focus on the outcomes, your focus on stopping the adversary is exactly right. Because for me, as a system developer, as a system builder, I would much rather have use cases. Tell me what you're trying to achieve. Don't give me a bunch of shall statements. And this approach is perfectly in line with that. Tell me what the outcomes are. Tell me what activities we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to stop the adversarial TTPs. And let's just go after it.
To learn more, go to fedgovtoday.com/in-depth. Welcome back. The Defense Department's cybersecurity maturity model certifications, only one example of the Pentagon's interest in the security and integrity of the supply chain of the defense industrial base. The department has a number of other DIB supply chain initiatives underway or under consideration, too. Jennifer Bisceglie is founder and CEO of Interos. At Sea Airspace this week, she tells me how the discussion about supply chain is changing in the defense industrial base.
I think that what I find very interesting about all of these conversations that is very, very different than 5-6 years ago is how reliant the reputation of these businesses are as far as their supply chain. So if you think about was pre-pandemic, you really didn't have a lot of people talking about supply chain. Now everyone has some sort of discussion around executing on the mission, and a large part of it is just fulfilling, the orders at the end of the day.
Yeah. What is driving that? Is it just that the department is so focused on that, or the companies, do you think, detecting something in their own operations and maybe in their own P&Ls about why they need to pay attention to the supply chain to the degree that they are now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And to be honest with you, I think it's both. I think one is the department's not letting them off the hook. And the second is it's not good enough not to know anymore.
Yeah.
And I find that really eye-opening. Years ago, it was okay not to know. And now it's like, well, no, the pandemic was here. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting to invest in? And no longer is it good enough not to have the orders in time, multiple months out, because there's going to be some sort of an interruption that comes through.
What are the answers that those companies should be ready, willing, and able to provide to the department about the statuses of their supply chains, so the department can then have the confidence that it needs to have?
Yeah, I think so. We broke it down into 6 different areas of risk. One is financial. First and foremost, you got to understand financial. Second is cybersecurity. We talked a little bit about that earlier. The third is sustainability, ESG. Some people really pay attention to it. Some people don't, but you want to have it in front of you. And then we look at other things like geopolitical risk or restricted entities. Where are unfriendly or maybe not as friendly countries in your supply chain that could, on purpose or by accident, interrupt? And then the last one is this concept of catastrophic risk, which if you think about hurricane season and Hurricane Ian that decimated Florida years ago, how do I get ahead of what's happening out there? And not only do we see that in the private sector, but we actually see that not only do we see that in the private sector, but also in the public sector. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine and you had 3,000 sanctions levied against Russia in 10 business days, every one of our customers on a Saturday were able to go to the platform to look at their environment themselves and answer that type of a question. That's pretty powerful.
So none of these terms are scientific. I made them all up in my head as we're having this conversation, but it strikes me there are a number of levels of information that one has on one's supply chain to then be able to supply to the department. Situational awareness, I at least know what everything is and where everything's coming from. Security, I have pretty much some comfort that I have things locked down and I'm not worried about supply chain issues.
Right.
And then the ultimate is I have complete control over that supply chain and I know everything is going to be solid for time immemorial. How far along does one need to be, though, to be able to go to the department with some confidence and say, I'm doing my part at least?
Yeah, I would say that they need to know, and they also need to be comfortable not knowing. Okay. And right, because it's really hard to predict the future. And so I want to understand, here's the perfect path, and here's what happens if that perfect path doesn't work. And I need to be ready for both.
Mm-hmm. Do traditional risk management practices apply to supply chain, or there are some that companies, especially in the defense industrial base, should think about, should apply to when they're making their evaluations?
You know, I think it's a great question. there is no schooling for what we do, which
Right.
people ask me this all the time. We actually created our own training data for the first time ever. And I think it's someplace in between, in that there are people that are classically trained for supply chain. You don't get rid of people being people, but you can also leverage technology. And I think that that's really the power that's out there. And that's really the investment. In Interos, we invested almost $300 million since 2019 in our technology in effort to move the conversation forward faster, because technology exists to do such a thing. And so I think we can take advantage of technology without having to hire a bunch of new people.
So what does the supply chain conversation look like when it's in its mature state at some point in the future?
Yeah, so we do a 4-step maturity process, everything from I'm not doing anything to I'm continuous monitoring. I would argue that most of us can get to continuous monitoring within 6 to 12 months. It doesn't take that long to get there, and technology just lets us get there faster.